do you feel this auction represents the current market? Do you feel overall market has stabilized or more room to fall, or if you got some grail is still going up? I do not think that the signature auctions represent the standard market. The signature auctions are, I mean, it's generally for people that have more money, that probably aren't affected as much by fluctuations in the economy and all that kind of thing. I think that it represents that market. I mean, there are different, there's like the high end market, there's the mid tier market, there's the lower end market. And I mean, from what I can tell, the high end market generally seems to still be doing pretty good. Um, like I said, there were definitely some low sales that were in this auction too. I think that the last couple auctions. Now, I'll be curious to see if this continues throughout the year, or if we're really front loaded on some serious auctions, because we had that January Heritage auction that was, I made videos. I'm like, this is the craziest auction I've ever seen in my life. And now granted, that one, I talked about this earlier in the video, that one still had more bigger books. So it had multiple books that broke that $1 million mark. Whereas this one only had one book that broke that $1 million mark, but it still had a lot of like top of census, really, really impressive books. And so this, this auction, it's hard to say if this one is more impressive than the January or not. It has some amazing stuff, but some really impressive auctions with Heritage. And then Comic Connect, that one, I talked about that in another video. I feel like that one went a little bit under the radar. That auction was insane. That auction had so much like mid to upper tier, like great books. And I made a post about it on Instagram. Like, I didn't even get the advertisement for it. I mean, I knew about it because I had been watching stuff on it. I might try to keep up on all this kind of stuff, but like, if you hadn't been and you were waiting for the advertisement for the auction, like the booklet that they send out where it's like, hey, we've got this auction coming up, here's some of the cool stuff that's in it. Mine showed up on the Saturday after the auction ended. And I posted about it on Instagram, and a bunch of people said the same thing. Their books, their advertisements showed up after the auction ended, or like the last day of a 6-day auction. And so that one, I feel like, it may have underperformed, but it may have underperformed because of lack of publicity on it. And that could have hurt it. I also felt like that one was a little too overloaded. It had way too much, in my opinion, like pre-code horror. I mean, I love pre-code horror, but everything has a saturation level. And that one had 2 big collections full of pre-code horror in it. It had the Bobby Blue collection. It had almost all of the EC books from that Bobby Blue collection. And then it had, among others, and then it also had this thing called like the P.A. Cole, I think, collection. And that was like all these PCH books, among others too. And so you doubled up on a lot of like high grade, big EC books. And I think it just overwhelmed the demand for it. But for me, it was a good opportunity. I bought a lot of stuff. So that's what I look for when I, when I see something like that. The Superman auction going to mainstream news may spike sales widespread. Well, I mean, Mickey made a video about that, I think yesterday. Basically that's part of the goal, with a lot of these like platforms is why they want to have big books like that, and why on average it's good for the hobby in general to have some of these big books come up for sale and not just sit in people's collections forever, because they bring attention. I mean, it's like, how many articles were there about Action Comics 1 selling for 6 million, the new record, like all over the place. Hey, Ryan, I'm only 8 months into comic collecting, and I'm enjoying the hobby and watching and learning from different YouTubers like you. I appreciate the help and learning. I collect for the art and money. Oh, hey, appreciate it. Thanks for watching the channel. Yeah, I mean, for me, like I've talked about before, it's like, this is also a business for me. I'm also a comic dealer. And so I'm also in it. Like, there's a financial side of it for me as well. And I'm a big cover collector. Like, for me, it really has to be a visually appealing book. And if it's not, it's generally not going to be a book that I want to, keep. I call it like my keeper list or whatever, even though somebody was joking recently that I need to change that name because I don't feel, it doesn't seem like I keep them very long. And it's true. They do cycle out fairly often. And it's because every time I get a new book in, it's competing with my other books on that keeper list. I only keep a limited amount of books. And so if I get something in that I really like, then it moves it out. Or if somebody offers me, something that like usually it's a I don't want to sell it price if it's on my keeper list. And if somebody offers me that I don't want to sell it price, I sell it. And then that gives me the ability to buy more stuff. And so, I mean, that's all part of the fun. I mean, I like getting in new books I haven't had before, just like cool stuff like that. And so, I mean, I've had people ask, like, they wonder, like, oh, how do you buy this or how do you afford that or whatever? And it's because I sell stuff. I sell other books and then I buy new things. And I just, that's how you learn which books you really, really like. And so, like, for example, I picked up a Blue Bolt 105 recently. I had a 4.5. I got a solid offer for that, and I ended up selling it. And then recently I picked up a 6.5. It's one of my favorite LB Cole covers. And I was able to get it back, and it's a pretty rare book. And so that's one of those things. It's like, even if a book is rare, you will have opportunities come up again. Even something like this, like a Detective Comics 31. This is a rare book. This does not come up for sale often, but in the last 2 years, there have been 3 opportunities to buy a universal copy. And if you're okay with restored, there have been more opportunities. I've bid on a restored copy of this book before. I mean, it's just it. Certain books, like I'm much more okay with restored books than others, and that it's like you will have opportunities. There are some that are extremely rare that it might be years and years between them, and so you do have to put that into consideration when you're bidding on something. But most books, even pretty rare books, you'll have a few opportunities per year. So I noticed that with these auctions, can be money around spring, but can be a place to get good deals at the end of the year. So I generally see that spring. I often see spring as a very good time for prices, like they do well. Summer tends to be more of a lull. I've heard people say it's because there's more cons and people aren't, maybe watching the auctions and they're traveling, so they aren't sitting on their computer at home watching these books come up for sale. I've generally noticed like September or October seems to be pretty good prices. I know some people have seen the opposite, but I've generally seen some pretty strong sales around that time of year. I notice the weakest times tend to be summer and like right around Christmas, especially on eBay. Like eBay auctions around Christmas that is where you want to go look for deals. That is probably the best time of year to find, just all the deals. Have I found any keys that are good long-term investments and track comparative to the S&P? I mean, I've done a number of videos in the past where I talk about how I price out comics, and basically I look at, I use, I look at what the yearly return basically for those books across like large periods of time. Because the thing with comic books that you always have to kind of remember, that's very different with, and we'll use this as an example here, this Batman one. That's very different than the stock market, is that the stock market, you have items changing hands all the time, many times a day, like millions of times a day. And so you have this like price that's pretty set, and it can move up and down, but it doesn't have like a big bandwidth, like at any moment in time. Comic books, depending on what platform, whether it's an auction or a fixed price or private sale or whatever, you can have some really wide ranges in prices. So that's one thing you always have to think about there. It's where where you buy can be a big deal. It's kind of like housing. Like your buy-in can be a big deal with comics, especially at least on the short term. On longer term, but that's why what I'm getting at here is on longer term, what you look at is you kind of look at where that general trend for the book. And I generally have seen that I think when I did like a lot of like the Silver Age, like the major Silver Age keys for heroes, I'll say like villains do worse. It is true. Like when people say like heroes are better investments than villains, it is 100% true. Even like Dr. Doom, like Dr. Doom before the comic boom, it was like he was returning, it was like 4% a year. Whereas like AF-15, I think that one returns like 14% a year. And so, I mean, it's like there are certain books that do very, very well. Amazing Fantasy 15, Hulk 181, I think Amazing Spider-Man 129 generally does pretty good. I mean, there you can go back and maybe and find some of those videos. And I talk about what their percentage returns are, because the whole reason for those videos was that we'd had these big spikes from the comic boom. And so I was trying to look at what would these books be at if you took their pricing changes prior to that spike and just extended it out. And if you've checked out, say, like Swaggle House Comics, like where he does the his comic index, like you can see like where a lot of those books have come back in line with, or the averages have come back in line with where they had been trending previously. And so that's how I've been saying, like, or at least making my best educated guess, like when it is a reasonable time to start buying some of those books again. Because I mean, you can see, like, I mean, I love Golden Age books. That's part of the reason why I've gotten so much into Golden Age, but I've also been very hesitant about silver, bronze, everything else. Like I used to have a fair amount. I mean, I still do have a decent amount of silver and bronze, but I used to have them on like my keeper list and everything. And I sold them because I was just so afraid of what was going on with silver and bronze books. And now I've just been constantly watching and seeing, like, when can I feel comfortable buying back into those books again? And if you look at something like Amazing Fantasy 15, like this one, I mean, Amazing Fantasy 15 is a perfect example of this, because it corrected pretty quick back down from those peak prices. And let's look at a grade maybe that sells a little more often, like a 4 or 5. And I mean, so look at this. So it's like, you look at that kind of that general trend for this, and these aren't log scale. So when over long periods of time, it can sometimes throw things off a little bit, like you would have in this, when you're generally looking at like the S&P, you generally use a log scale after a while. But you can see, like, it's now back pretty much in line with where it had been. And it's been there now for like a year and a half that it's gotten back into that trend line. And it's just, that's why, like, AF15, as long as I look at it like that, I feel pretty comfortable buying AF15. But you can see, like, there's always going to be these ups and downs. Like somebody paid 36,000 here, and like 2 months prior, someone paid 45,000. And now that 45,000 is probably relatively safe long term. You stretch it out 5 years or 10 years, but in the short term, they overpaid. Like that's really that's all you can say, is like they overpaid in the short term. Long term, they're probably okay. But that's why, like, books like this, where you can do those long term trends, that's like AF15 is the best example, really. But there are, like, a lot of the Silver Age keys. Like I said, if you go back and check out those videos, the Silver Age keys, the Bronze Age keys, they generally show anywhere from 10 to 15%, and over when you stretch it out. But the thing is, when you look at, let's go back to that 4-5, these books, what they'll often do is they'll have like 1 year where they do a big jump, or 1 period where they do a big jump, and then they stay flat for a few years, and then they do a jump, and then they stay flat for a few years. It's not like the stock market where, you know, you might have something that's like, you watch it gradually trend up. It tends to be that you have these fluctuations where they have a big jump and then they stay flat, and a jump and they stay flat. But that's why if you look at it long term, they tend to be. But again, I can't predict what things will do long term. I don't know if 20 years from now nobody cares about comics. That is also very, you know, a very real possibility that could be out there. But if you go off the last like 20, 30, 40 years of history, people do seem to like these collectibles and relate to them. And while I know some people get really hung up on the fact that there aren't as many like new comic buyers now, I don't know if that really matters. It might, but one of the big differences we have now is that you have the people that grew up watching the movies. And when they become, you know, an age where they have enough money and they just remember, like, oh, I remember like growing up watching Captain America or Hulk or Iron Man or whatever else, are they going to then be like, I have money now, maybe I want to have this, you know, this collectible that's ties to those characters. And so that could also be where that comes from later on. I have no idea though. You know, it's like everybody's just their best guess out there. I find that most people that collect Golden Age or retirement age, what happens in years to come, will the next generation even be interested? I mean, I'm not even close to retirement age. So I don't know. I feel like Golden Age, it's almost like it's what a lot of people just like kind of like morph into as they get older. so I mean, maybe it's just like, you know, after time, you just start to like, you're like, you want that, like try to find that rarer thing. That's one of the things that's always really appealed to me about Golden Age. Why I eventually kind of like got into that I just it felt too easy to get the Silver and Bronze Age books. I was like, I can buy these anytime. It was made it, I don't know, it's just like something that was extra, it made it fun to like come across these Golden Age books. You have to wait for them. You couldn't just go out and buy them. You know, you had to try to find that right copy or the right price or the, you know, right types of flaws on them. And that just, it was something that added something to me as I, you know, it's like I wasn't always into Golden Age books. Like my keeper list used to be predominantly Silver and Bronze. And over time it just kind of morphed into Golden Age. But no, I mean, I think classic stuff will always be desirable. There's lots of Golden Age stuff that has like no value. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like there are a lot of Golden Age books out there that are not worth buying. But I think if you stick to the genres and those covers and everything that are generally desired, I don't think you're going to have too much of a problem. Do buyers pay more for a pedigree, or it doesn't really matter? Buyers definitely pay more for a pedigree. I pay more for a pedigree. So, and it does depend on the pedigree. The Mile High pedigree is one of the most famous pedigrees. So it often gets a pretty significant premium, even though there are tons of books in it. It's like 15,000 books, but the Mile High, here, let me just so you guys are something interesting to look at over here. But that Mile High pedigree, often goes for a pretty big premium. I would say all pedigrees generally go for a premium. Promise Collection has been generally going for 25 to 50% premium. The biggest premium that you will get from anything is the Okajima pedigree. The Okajima pedigree often sells for anywhere from like 6 to 10 times what the non-pedigree copy would sell for. And what it all comes down to is it's the pedigree, it's adding a story behind the book. It's connecting some specific person or piece of history to that book. And so that's what it's adding. And that's really what you're paying for. And so like with Okajima, you should go check out Karen's Pages. She has a YouTube channel and she did a great in-depth look into the Okajima pedigree and found that it looks like it was actually a different woman and her brother that were in one of the Japanese internment camps that was collecting comics than what was originally thought. It is a great video that she did. Highly recommended. It's her page's name is Karen's Pages. That's her YouTube channel. And so if you're interested in pedigrees or the Okajima pedigree, definitely go check that one out. It was really, really well done. And you can tell she spent a ton of time researching it and did a lot of work on that. So it was really impressive. But yeah, the Okajima pedigree by far the most, but they all, the ones that are more well-known tend to sell for bigger premiums. Like the Davis Crippen one tends to be a pretty big premium. The Gaines file copies tend to do pretty well, even though there's a lot of them. People like having those Gaines file copies. I really like the Cosmic Aeroplane pedigree because I think it's like the coolest name of a pedigree that's out there. Promise Collection has a cool story behind it. San Francisco pedigree has a cool story behind it. I mean, it's not cool meaning fun. It's like a sad story. It's like son goes to war and doesn't come back, but it's like it's not just like this person was a hoarder, like the Mile High collection is kind of like this person was a hoarder. It's like a lot of these collections were, you'd call them like, I mean, they kept them in good condition, but they're basically hoarder collections. but some of the other ones have these very interesting stories behind them, and those tend to sell for more. Thank you for confirming on my pedigree assumption. Would you buy a Bat 232 Murphy pedigree? So when you're talking about, I think Mint Hunter did a video on this because he tends to buy more in like the bronze type, that age of book, and he talked about what pedigrees add in that era. Because when I'm talking about pedigrees, I'm generally talking about Golden Age pedigrees. And so like those are the ones that I care about more than the silver bronze pedigrees. The silver and bronze pedigrees add less. I think he showed that on average it was like 10 to 15% more that you often saw with the silver and bronze pedigrees. But that's usually what he was, I think that's what he was seeing when he made that video a while ago. I don't remember how long ago. I just remember watching it at some point. And no, I'm not a full-time comic dealer. It's a side. I think I said that earlier in the video. It's a side thing for me. But how do I price books like Golden and Silver Age? It doesn't come up for as often. So pricing, books that don't come up as often, whether that's high grade Silver Age or high grade Bronze Age or Golden Age. You just, you often have to use some comparisons with other grades. And so, like, for example, like this Batman 1, if you have this, like a 6.0, or let's say the 7.0 that comes up for sale, and what you would do is you would look at, say, what it sold for, and let's pretend the 2023 sale isn't there. And you look at, like, what did this book sell for in 2018? And so it sold in 2018, it went for 334,000. And then we go down to another grade, like this 2.5. And we say, what did this book sell for in 2018? Looks like in 2018, this was probably about an $85,000 book. Now it's a $156,000 book. So it went up maybe like, what's that, like 90%. So it's gone up 90% in those 6 years. So I would look at this 7.0 and I would say 2018, this book was 335,000. I would expect it to go for maybe around, 90% would be 650, 640. And look at what it sold for, 630. You can get pretty close with those types of estimates. It's just like the books often tend to move similarly across grades. There are always going to be some little weird outliers and things, but if you check a few grades, you look at that, you can get an idea what they're going to go for. And that's how you generally can price that kind of stuff. The stuff that's more rare or just higher grades, so it doesn't sell nearly as often.